Right, so the fishing has well and truly got up and going now for the year. There's matches on all the time, all the qualifiers have started, all the festivals are getting run, and it's really gone into what they call like silly season for fishing now, where there's just stuff on all the time. Now, through April I had absolutely loads on, so what we've decided to do today is just run through the month's fishing, what's worked, what hasn't, what I feel like I could have done different through the months, and sort of what I think is going to happen also now going forward. So talking through the month, starting on my birthday, 1st of April, April Fool's Day, we went to Weston Pools for the pairs match, and I was fishing with Matty Dawes, and Matty was supposed to be doing the draw that day, and actually he didn't get up out of bed, so the draw was called. It's like, they said, right, draw, and I thought, where's Matty? Tried to ring him, and I woke him up and he was still in bed, so that started with me having to do the draw, and I went in the bag, and I went in for me at first, and I actually drew 10 on weir, which is a brilliant peg, so I was made up to be there, to be honest. It's an M peg, always a good peg on there. So I was more than happy with that, to be fair. Now, for Matty, I drew in peg 12 on Stretton, which I think is probably just sort of in the middle of, it's close to some fish, but I don't think it's an amazing area. You either seem to want to be in the arm or in the widest bit of the bowl, sort of 14 and 16, but I still feel like he could have done well there. So, you know, we were reasonably happy with the pegs. Now, I went to my peg 10 on weir, and I was a bit undecided what to do, because at the time, to be honest, it was not really fishing like summery sort of tactics like it warmed up, but there was a chance that there was some fish to catch on them sort of tactics, sort of your edge fishing and your shallow fishing. So I was a bit undecided, and I got to my peg, and because I drew a good peg, I thought, I'm just going to fish positive today, I'm just going to go for it, and I felt like that was the way to go if I was going to win the lake. Now, I actually had the cameraman today opposite me on another M peg as well, Rob Swan, which is standard for me and him to be sat on the M pegs, to be honest. And obviously we were going to have a good little battle, and I know that he actually won the lake the day before on maggots. Now, it actually was raining quite strong in the morning that day, and I had some casters with me, and I seen the stamp of the fish what he'd caught the day before, and they were them big F1s, and I just felt like casters were going to be good, so I decided to go with casters. I always normally catch well on casters on there in the summer. So me bait wise, obviously you've got bait limits at Weston, so I think that day I took sort of 5 pints of casters with me. I took a pint of dead maggots, and I took 2 pints of 4mm pellets and 2 pints of micro pellets, and then a bit of ground bait for in my edge as well, which is on top of your limit. So that was my bait choice. And the plan was going to be pellets short. I was going to start on soft pellets. Again, I spoke to Rob the day before, and he said he tried hard pellet short at the start. It wasn't great, so I thought, I wasn't sure whether to fish hard pellet or soft pellet before. If hard pellet hadn't worked for Rob the day before, I'll just try soft pellet, and it can't be any worse. So that was the plan. And I was going to maybe swap that to throwing casters there later on. Casters long for shallow and on the bottom, and then ground bait and dead maggots in the edge. That was the plan. So as the day went on, started short on pellets, and after 5 minutes I caught a carp about £5, and I thought that's a good start. And I noticed Rob hadn't caught any, and I looked round the lake and no one was really getting bites, so I thought, well, that's a good start, getting a carp in the net while I fed my caster line. Went back in, and amazingly that day I never had another bite short the rest of the day. Now, normally on weir pool there's loads of bites on that short line, so that was really strange, and I could sort of sense to myself that the lake wasn't going to fish as well as I thought it was going to fish straight away, and I thought that maybe then I'd made a bit of a mistake with my approach, a bit positive. But anyway, I moved out shallow, and on that day I sort of nicked an odd crucian and maybe a very odd eyed, and I did have a couple of F1s early on and a couple of carp, and then it just shut down. I just couldn't get any bites, and I was sat there struggling. Rob opposite me, he wasn't bagging up either, but it seemed like a lot of the time when he had some bites on them maggots, what he was fishing, he caught an odd more carp than me, and I don't know whether the carp were just more over on that side of the lake or the maggots was the reason he caught them odd more carp, but he definitely pulled the lead ahead of me, where I felt like he was probably £30 ahead of me going into the sort of last 90 minutes. And I felt like he probably had £70, £80, and I only probably had £40 or £50, so I was well behind. Now on that day as well, Alan Green on about peg 16 in the middle of the lake had a really good match, sort of just dobbing him steady on a waggler. He obviously realised the lake wasn't fishing great, he wasn't getting many bites on his pole, so he just sat and been patient, chucking into the middle of the lake on a waggler, and caught really well, to be honest. And I felt like he was probably beating me and Rob, and looking at at that time, I actually reckon he probably had a ton going into the last hour and a half that day. Now, obviously, with me and Rob being on end pegs, what we did have is the edges were hopefully going to kick in well for us, and that's what sort of happened for me that day. I'd fed ground bait and maggots in the edge, and I had an amazing run of fish at the end. I caught sort of 10 F1s that I actually reckon me 10 F1s might have gone 45 pound that day. They were that big. The stamp was unbelievable, and I was fishing red hydro, 022 to 019, my proper edge tackle, because the fish on there can be massive and they're pretty ferocious, and when you hook them, they're often running around the corner and snagging you up. So put my proper gear on and ended up catching these big F1s, and you could tell they were big because they were taking some time to land even on red hydro. And I did also catch 2 carp down there as well, and I ended up with 100 and I think I had 107 pound on the day. And I think that was enough for third on the lake, and I think there was 109, which Al Green I think had 109, and I think Rob had about 112. So it was mega tight. Rob actually ended up winning the match overall with 112, and I ended up 4th in the match with 107. So looking back, I definitely think if I'd have been a little bit more negative, and if maybe I'd have chose to fish with maggots long, I probably should have done a little bit better from my peg, because I know that peg 10 is a very good peg. So on the overall, so like I say, I was third on my lake. Matty ended up, I think he was second on his lake. I think he was beat by peg in the arm. I want to say peg 8, Gaz Thomas, just beat him by sort of 15 pound. So we ended up with 5 points, which got us third overall in the pairs, with Robbie Griffiths and Nathan Spain winning the pairs. So brilliant match that, and great way to start the month. Obviously, a few things to improve on from that match, but I always think personally at this time of the year it's probably the hardest time of the year to get right, because it's sort of such on an in-between where you might bag up or you might have a tough match. And that day it was definitely a day to be a little bit more patient and just wait for the quality fish and not try and go for it shallow and try and catch a load of F1s. So I've learned that now. For if I was to go back on that lake at this time of the year, definitely go for maggots. So that was that match. Going forward, the next thing that we moved on to was Baldwin's Pools Fishermania. Now this venue, if you've never been to Baldwin's Pools, go to Baldwin's Pools. It's absolutely unbelievable venue. It's stunning. There's 13 lakes. All the lakes are solid with fish. It's an amazing venue. It's actually the first time I'd ever fished a match there. Now I have been to Baldwin's quite a few times in the past, coaching and stuff like that, but I've never actually fished a match there before that match. So I was really looking forward to it. Now on the day I didn't draw so well. I drew peg 2 on Sycamore. Now I got told that peg doesn't normally go in after I drew it, but it sounded like it could have been an end peg to me. When I heard peg 2, I thought that sounds like an end peg, that could be a good peg. And I got to it and it actually was on like a side bank, and I could tell it doesn't go in because it had been cut out. You could tell there's like a new peg put in, and they'd cut out like some of the reeds to make this peg go in. So obviously with there being more pegs in on a Fishermania, they put that peg in. And it looked a little bit tight there. It didn't look like a winner, but knowing Baldwin's, I knew I was going to get a good day's fishing because it's just stuffed. So, like I say, I was on peg 2 and I had the anglers on the side bank. So when I looked around at my peg, I felt like the only way I was going to do well was catching short and in my edges. And I know that fishing close does work well at Baldwin's. There is a lot of sort of small stocky F1s and some big F1s, but they tend to feed in close. So my plan was pellet short. I spent ages cutting my edges out that day. Like I say, it was a peg that doesn't normally go in, so trying to find a nice clean bit to fish in the edge was difficult. But I spent a bit of time. I created a couple of nice spots. My right hand line seemed to be my better spot. I fished a shorter line to my left. I had a bit of an overhanging tree to my left, but I did get a nice little spot where I was just going to loose feed me maggots. I did bring some casters with me that day. Now at Baldwin's, you've got a 5-pint limit on maggots and casters, so you have to sort of make your mind up. And I sort of learnt from my day the couple of days before, if you felt like it was going to be tough, don't just go for it shallow with casters. Take your maggots to your peg, and you can do a little bit more with them if you need to get some bites. So I chucked some maggots to my left-hand edge. My right-hand edge, I decided to fish with micros. You're not allowed ground bait at Baldwin's as well, so micros in my right edge, and then different hook baits over the top, maybe corn or maggots or maybe an expander. And as it turned out, I basically just rotated my edges for most of the day. The fish didn't seem to want to go down in the deep water that day. Every time I tried it, you got an odd little liner or something, you didn't catch a fish. So I just rotated my edges, mainly just being patient on my micros line in my right hand edge, and then I had a good little spell to my left on maggots late on, and caught loads of sort of stocky F1s, sort of from £1 to £1.50, sort of ghosty and blondie F1s, lovely coloured fish. And then I had a few carp mixed in, a few better F1s later on my left hand margin, and I ended up with about, I think I had about 97 and 98 pound, which won my section. So considering the way the peg looked in the morning, and it was really tight, an unbelievable day's fishing, plenty of bites, probably had 40 or 50 fish, and that's why Baldings is such a fantastic venue. You're always going to be guaranteed to get a few bites. So fantastic, enjoyed it. And I think on that day, Chris Riley qualified from Chestnut Pool with about 180 pound. I think the venue fished well, there was tons everywhere, so can't wait to go back there next year on the Fish Show qualifier. Hopefully they're going to use it again next year, which I think they will, because it is fantastic. So that was Baldings Pools, great to be there. And then we went straight on after that to, I think the next thing was the Partridge Festival, which if you've watched the members channel live match that we did at Partridge, you'll have seen how I got on that festival and what the fishing was like. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But basically we fished a 2-day festival on there. It was all meat fishing. I drew on Covey 6 both days. And I had 2 nice days fishing. I think I had 90 pound, 93 pound and about 110 pound. And basically finished nowhere, so the festival fished really well. I didn't get the best of draws on the lake. I was on the right lake both days, but not in the right areas of the lake. But luckily, my mate Kieran won the festival. He had a brilliant festival, caught plenty of fish both days, so it's made up. That festival was actually called the Governor Festival at Partridge, so now Kieran's been renamed the Governor, so everywhere he goes he's been called the Governor, so that was good. We had a good time at Partridge. And then moved on after that to the Golden Reel qualifier at Partridge again. Now I've actually done a separate video talking in more detail about this match, because I actually managed to go on to win this match. So I drew on Willow Pool, peg 4, and had a brilliant day, catching short on meat and shallow on casters, and ended up with £175 and won the match. So if you want to know a little bit more about how I actually approached that peg in a little bit more detail, we did do a full video on sort of how I approached it on that day, so check that video out. But basically, like I say, I had a nice match, caught on a couple of different things, meat short, casters shallow, and managed to get through to the final, so brilliant to get through to one so quick. And then moving on, where did we go next? Trying to remember where we were at next. I think we went to the Monkhall Festival next. So Monkhall, obviously, people, if you've watched any of the sort of coverage that Gary Rogers and Catchmore Media have done from the Monkhall festivals, you'll know how stuffed with fish that place is. Full of fish, big weights, and we went obviously knowing that a couple of other fisheries were starting to pick up the weight, so I expected it to be quite a big weight affair if you were going to do well. So plans going down there, margins with micros in the shallow water, casters shallow, they were going to be my main two. Maybe hard pellets if you're on buzzard, but main approaches were going to be micros in the edges and casters shallow. Now day one, went in the bag, pulled out 10 on swallow, and I reckon that's one of the best pegs on the fishery, so I was buzzing. Great way to start the festival, 10 on swallow. Now I've never been on that peg before, and getting there I plumbed my edges up, and it was quite frustrating really. I didn't realise how deep the edges were there. Now generally that peg's so dominant when the lake's fishing a little bit trickier in the sort of colder months, and there's a lot of carp stack up across there, but to be honest, I didn't feel like fishing across. It's quite wide, sort of 14, 16 metres. I didn't feel like that was going to be an approach that was going to catch the big enough weight to win, so I sort of ruled that out. And because it was quite deep, my peg, I just felt like shallow fishing was going to be the number one, so I did put an edge line in. Managed to find a spot that was probably sort of 2.5 foot deep, which, you know, was okay, but still a little bit deeper than what I'd want it. And I sort of basically mainly rotated that line in shallow, but I caught most of my fish shallow with just an odd carp and F1 in my edges. So I had a lovely day catching a load of hide. I think I probably had 100 pound of hide that day shallow, sort of another 100 and so pound of F1s, couple of carp, and finished with, well, I actually would have had 228 pound, which would have put me second in the match. I think I still did end up second in the match. I don't think it actually cost me any place in the match, but I did go over in my nets and get knocked back to 218 or 217, so I think I lost about £11. Just basically in my 4 nets what I had in went over by a couple of pound in each. I didn't go over by a lot in one of my nets, just a couple in each. So obviously the next day I knew, instead of going to £50 in a net on my clicker, just go to sort of 45 and make sure I've got plenty of tolerance. So didn't cost me too much on the day. I was hoping it wouldn't cost me too much in the festival overall, but I did manage to win my lake. 1 point, good way to start the festival. So going into day 2, and I went in and drew 7 on Hawk. Now on the same festival last year I drew this peg and I had a decent result. I come 3rd on the lake, but if I'm honest, you tend to struggle to compete from this sort of area of the lake. I do think it's probably one of the poorest pegs on the lake, peg 7, but that day I got there and the wind was blowing at us. Now on the day I had Rob Swan to my left again, so he was next peg to me again, and I know he was in some good form, so I knew Rob would be hard to beat, especially if the fish were going to be blew down to our end with the wind. And the plan was, my mate young Alan had been on that lake the day before, and he said to me there was not many carp feeding, not many F1s, but you could get a bite of chuck short on maggots off hide, and the sort of good hide in that lake, £1.5 to £2 a piece. So that was going to be, you know, a big part of my match. I thought short with maggots, fishing for hide. So the plan was, all in goes, started on me edge line, seeing if I could nick a couple of carp just while I build up my shallow line. And that day I went in the edge and caught 2 big F1s straight away. Now I thought that's strange, because I spoke to Alan and he said to me the day before, he said he'd hardly seen an F1 caught on the old lake. He said to me he thought there was only probably 5 or 6 F1s caught on the whole lake the day before. Now I'd gone in and caught 2 big F1s straight away. So anyway, I caught them no more. So I dropped on my maggot line, expecting to go in and catch hide. And I've gone in, dropped on the bottom, threw some maggots in and had some big liners on my float. And I thought, I wonder if them hide are coming up shallow. Now normally on that lake, you catch your hide on the deck. They stay down, you fish nice and short and you catch the hide. Now, I moved on to my shallow fishing, picked up my shallow rig and basically didn't come off it most of the day, then just catching in spells, and there was a lot of F1s feeding, so for whatever reason them F1s just switched on overnight. Now unfortunately that day for me, Rob Swan next to me also caught really well on casters shallow, and on maggot shallow, and I just seemed to have spells in the day where I sort of slowed up and had sort of 20 minutes, half an hour where I wasn't putting fish in the net, and Rob would just carry on catching a couple, and I just felt again like I was chasing him all day and I was behind. So that was frustrating, because obviously I felt like I needed a win to try and win the festival. So I still ended up having a brilliant day's fishing, and I ended up with £209. So another brilliant day, like I say, another big weight, £200. But unfortunately, wasn't enough on the day, as Rob ended up with 219 and ended up just pipping me. So he'd ended up catching similar to me. Obviously, I think he seen me get my shallow rigs out, and so he decided to copy me. So I wanted to get that in on the camera with him being behind the camera. And he just beat me fishing the same way, so a bit of a frustrating one, but it's one of them where I didn't want to beat myself up too much, because I felt like I'd had a good festival, I'd caught some fish. Now on the overalls I ended up with 3 points, and I ended up 3rd in the festival. Now as it turned out, Andy Bennett had a brilliant second day. He caught 290 odd pound, nearly 300 pound on Buzzard Pool. He won the festival on weight. Connor Barlow was 2nd, like I say, I come 3rd. And looking back, obviously the weight the day before didn't cost me, so you know, everything went okay. I just needed to try and beat Rob on the second day, so £10 more. Looking back in hindsight, what I would have done differently on that second day, my edges never really come good, and a few of the lads that day actually caught really well just short in front of the keep net late on sort of top kit and one, so I would have also put that swim in. But maybe if I'd have done that, maybe Rob would have also, you know, followed suit, and then would have ended up with a similar outcome anyway. So it's one of them where I just think just need a bit more luck on the day. But yeah, that was the Monkhall Festival. Brilliant as always, loads of fish to be caught. And then the next one, it was straight to Lindholme Fish Show. And all the talk was you need to be on loco. They said that loco was fishing well. Benny's didn't seem to be fishing as well as it could do. Bonsai was going to be pegged quite tight, 40 pegs. And then the other lakes that were in were the Strip, which Strip had just been redug and they just restocked it. I think Aaron said he put something like 22,000 F1s into Strip. So we know that that could potentially throw up a weight, but apparently the fish were quite small. And then obviously beaches. And I ended up drawing Bonsai, peg 47, which is sort of just outside the calf. And I looked okay, but it was quite tight. It was peg 2, miss 1, so I sort of felt like it wasn't going to be strong enough to win the match on that lake. I did feel like I could get a good day's fishing though, because that Bonsai is absolutely rigid. And yeah, the plan was I set up a method feeder for a cross. Didn't want to start loose feeding out on a bomb because with it being tight, I didn't feel like having 2 loose fed lines was going to work. I feel like I would have split my fish up, so I decided method across, casters down the middle for shallow. Again, it was quite windy that day, so I fished about 13 metres. And then I set up to fish with casters and worms short on the bottom, and I also fed my edge. Now, as it turned out, basically the only way I could catch was shallow that day. Seems to be the case at Lindholme a lot of the times that the fish, especially when it's a bit moody, they don't like following the bait down to the bottom and eating off the deck. You tend to just catch your fish shallow. So I basically fished a range of different rigs, anything from sort of a fixed dibber to a fixed F1 shallow a little bit deeper to an overshotted, which is now allowed at Lindholme, so that's another good option, and a jigger, and just basically just kept rotating in different depths and nicking odd fish, good little spells, harder spells, and I ended up with 126 pounds that I won my section, so another brilliant day's fishing. On that day, Adam Playford actually won the qualifier from Strip Pool, which I think a lot of anglers would have drew Strip that day and gone, oh, I'm on that Strip, because back in the day that used to be a bit of a tougher lake. Not one that you'd fancy to win, but I think now with the new stock in and with it being redug, I think it's going to be a lake that people are going to want to draw going forward on them qualifiers, because it seems like it's absolutely ran with fish. And what was interesting, I know Aaron said that he'd stopped them fish and there was a lot of small fish, but I think Adam caught quite a lot of big old F1 shallow on casters, so obviously there is a few big fish still in there, so it's nice to know now that when you go into Lindholme, don't discount the Strip. If you draw on there, you've always got a good chance. So massive well done to Adam. Another brilliant day's fishing, another qualifier gone, but another really enjoyable day out on the bank. And then next we were on to the Spring Spectacular Festival at Tunnel Barn. Actually travelled down with Andy Bennett, and we were going, and we'd never fished this festival before. Obviously it's a new festival, and we weren't sure what the fishing was going to be like, and obviously we were chatting about it in the week, about whether we felt like that meat was going to be good. Obviously at Partridge, meat was good. When we went in March to Tunnel, meat was the bait, but it just seemed like you can look at the results and you can tell when that meat's starting to switch off and the fishing's changing. And it seemed like shallow started to come into it, and a bit more maggot fishing, a bit of caster fishing. So obviously we had to sort of pay attention to that. Now on the first day, I drew peg 6 on Canal Pool, which I love that canal. I think it's a brilliant lake that. You just seem to be able to catch a few fish on most of the pegs. The opposite side, I'd say, is a little bit more patchy, where it's a little bit narrower. But that main side, that first section, pegs 1 to 11, seems to be a few bites all on that straight. It's just full of fish, that canal. I do like that as a lake. Like I said, I was on peg 6. Generally, I'd say that is, out of all the pegs, normally the toughest peg on the bank. But when I got to it, they'd pegged it 1, 3, 6, 9. So I had 2 pegs out either side. So I knew I'd have a load of fish. There'd be plenty of bites to be had. Plan-wise, again, I wanted to have meat in my armoury just in case. But then the rest of it was just going to be fishing with maggots. So my right-hand edge plumbed up really nice. I had a little hole about 5 metres where I could get in nice and flat around 2 foot. So I decided to feed ground bait and maggots there. It was quite windy again, so I rolled out my cross line. I decided to throw some maggots at 6 metres for shallow and on the deck, and then I also chucked some meat in my left edge. There's sort of a pipe in that peg to your left, and it plumbs up in and around that pipe. It plumbs up quite nice in about 3 foot of water, so I decided to chuck my meat there. I didn't want to chuck meat short in the deep water and have my 6 metre line and split my fish, so I just decided meat down my left maggot and ground bait to me right, and then maggot short up and down was my approach, and ended up having a lovely day's fishing. So the first hour I just fished in my edge to me right. I caught 17 fish, but they were them little stockies, but probably 17 fish for 20-ish pound. Decent start first hour. And then Pazza to my left, good mate of mine, Pazzy, he dropped in, started catching well shallow, and I could see him looking over, going, oh, I'm catching a few shallow, so I thought I'm going to have to go and have a go. So I picked my shallow rig up, and they were quite hard to catch, to be honest. And what was really interesting on this festival, and I think that was just on that festival in general, is that your overshotted rigs and your dibber rigs and your more positive shallow rigs just weren't working. Even when the fish were coming really shallow, you tended to need to fish like a really light rig. So I've actually got one here, one of the rigs what I would look to use. And it's one of these 3B8 Winter Maggies. Now, even in the wind, there's a big wind on the lake, really, really windy. This tiny little light float was by far the best. And I actually got a bit of good info off Des ship. Callum Dix was behind me on, I think he was on Newpool behind me. And he's come up to me and he said, Des was on, I think he was either on my peg or the peg to the right a couple of weeks before. He said, I'm going to ring him in a sec, I'll see how he caught. And he actually said that his best rig by a million miles was a 3B8 Chianti for shallow, and the other rigs weren't working, and it was exactly the same for me. So that was a good little bit of info. And it just shows that, you know, how often if it's working for one angler, it's going to be the same for you as well. So that little 3B8 Winter Maggie with 3 strung out number 12s. Generally the best depth on that day was sort of between 16 and 20 inches. And I just caught, not ever bagged, but nice and steady shallow in little spells. You get a few stockies, a few silvers, and then you have a good little run of bigger F1s. And I just ticked along, got to sort of £100 going into that last sort of hour. And then luckily my right hand edge come really strong on ground bait and maggots. I caught a couple of decent carp and some big F1s on that. Finished with £148 and won the lake. So brilliant start to the festival. It fished really well. There was weights all over the fishery, so it looked really good going into the next couple of days. Day 2 I drew 19 on House Pool, which is round the narrow bit round the back behind the bridge. Now it's a funny little area, the lake this. It's not always amazing, but when the fish are catchable on the bottom, it can be quite good. And Jimmy Brooks had actually been on 21 the day before and caught £160. So I thought, bloody hell, you know, it might be a little bit better than I was expecting. Spoke to him, I think he caught a lot of fish fishing. I think he caught a few fish on maggot shallow across. There is a bit of a weed bed on 21, but I think he caught most of his fish short on maggots on the bottom. So my plan was, on my peg, I don't have a weed bed across. My plan was my edges and short on the bottom. My right edge is sort of 3 foot. I decided to throw maggots there and just fish live maggots. Again, I ruled the meat out. It was no good for me on canal the day before, so I ruled that out. Maggots to my right. To my left was a little bit shallower. I had a bit of a cut in. Ground bait there because that had been good for me the day before on canal, and maggots short. And on that day, the lake actually fished a little bit harder. It didn't fish as well as the day before. Obviously, 180 odd pound had been won the lake by Rob Swan. You can tell he's on a good light run of form. I keep mentioning him, but Rob, obviously, he'd won the match off there on the spit with 180 pound. But this day, you could just tell the lake wasn't fishing anything like that. I'm looking into the main lake and I can see people not getting bites. You know, we weren't really catching. We were catching a few fish around the back where we was, but we weren't bagging up. So it's just a case of being patient and keep rotating your lines. Try not to throw too many maggots in on that short line, just 2 lots of 10. Occasionally putting a little cad pot on and tightening it up just to try and get a bite, catching an odd skimmer. And I sort of ticked along all day. And then that last hour, my left edge on the ground bait again kicked in a little bit and had a good little run with some bigger F1s and ended up with £97, which won the section again. So I was on 2 wins going into the second day. I think there was quite enough few lads on 2 wins. I think there might have been 5 or 6 on 2 wins going into the last day. So I knew I needed to go in the bag and draw a peg that not only give me the chance to win the section, but also give me the chance to catch a big weight if I was going to try and win the festival. And I went into the bag and I drew out 1 on club. Now, it can be a good peg this, but it just seemed like I drew the complete wrong end of the lake. Now, another thing on this peg, when I got to it, what I noticed is it's probably 14.5 metres wide to the island, and you've just got reeds that stick out. You don't have sort of a cut in. And when I tried to have a quick plumb up there, it was deep, and I just felt like it wasn't an option. So obviously it simplified my match down a little bit. My plan was I was going to fish maggots down the middle again, up and down. a little bit deeper there, sort of 5 foot on that lake, so I did fancy catching a few up shallow. And then I fished my edges. My left edge was quite nice. It sort of plumbed up in around 15, 16 inch, nice and flat. So I was going to feed ground bait there. There is quite a few carp in club, so I was hoping that a few carp would come in there. And then my right hand edge was, again, it plumbed up quite nice, but it was a little bit deeper. There's some reeds. It's probably about 2 foot. Again, I was going to fish ground bait and maybe throw a few maggots there as well. So you could tell my approach is pretty centralised around maggots. And I ended up having a decent day's fishing again, but I just wasn't on the right stamp of fish. As it turned out, Adam Randall, who won the section on the day off peg 9, he caught nearly all carp fishing in the mud line across, and he caught sort of decent stamp carp. And I think he said that day he had sort of 40, 50 pound after an hour. So I just feel like I never really stood a chance on the last day, but it was a case of just trying to nick the fish out of my peg, get the best result out that I could. And I ended up, I think, with about 93 pound. And that ended up coming second in the section, so it put me on 4 points, and that put me 7th in the festival, and they paid the top 8, so I was happy to sneak in the frame. Looking back, there was no way I could have won the festival off the draws that I had. I didn't probably have the chance to win the section on the last day, but I definitely couldn't have caught the weights. I think realistically my best sort of finish that I could have got was 4th, but you know, happy to come 7th. Still felt like I'd had a decent festival. Brilliant time at Tunnel again. Just getting lucky. We're going to these venues and they're all so full of fish. It's just amazing fishing. So everywhere we're going, catching plenty of fish. It's just brilliant fishing. So yeah, on the overalls, Mikey Williams managed to win that festival. He had 3 wins. He had a match win on the last day. Brilliant. Well done, Mikey. Again, brilliant result for Mikey. So that was the Spring Spectacular. That was been sponsored as well by Garblino and Blakes, and they really backed the event well, both companies, and I think it's one of them festivals that will grow from strength to strength and probably be as popular as the Pole Masters and the Drennan going forward. So the last 2 matches that I fished this last month was the I'm trying to think which one's first. So I have 2 more qualifiers. The first one would have been the Partridge Fisho, and that was on the Covies 1 to 6 and also Willow. Now I fancied Willow to win this day because obviously I'd caught well on Willow a few days before, and actually the week before there was a Maven Match This qualifier on that I didn't fish. I was actually elsewhere. I think I was at Lindholme, and it'd only been won with about £129, and basically the lads who I spoke to on Willow said that the wind cost them being able to get across and being able to catch well on casters. So I felt like when the conditions were a little bit better on Willow this match, that might have won. So I did fancy Willow. But anyway, I went into the bag and I drew peg 10 on Covey 1, which on this lake, it's a brilliant peg because you're in the bowl area of the lake, and it means you generally catch quite a lot of F1 shallow. So I did fancy that peg on that lake. But to be honest, I didn't feel like Covey's 1 to 4 were going to be able to compete with your likes of lakes 5, 6 and Willow, because they're just a lot bigger stamp of fish. There's a lot more stocky fishing lakes 1 to 4, but still fancy it for a good day's fishing. And again, you never know, if the lakes fished a little bit harder like they did the week before, you might have had a chance. Plan was, again, mainly around shallow fishing. It was quite warm on the day. It was quite bright still, warm. I felt like shallow was going to be the main method. So I started in me left edge. That was the plan. My left edge is really nice on peg 10, and by being able to start there, it just allowed me to feed my shallow line in the bowl regularly with maggots. And I nicked a couple of fish. I think I had 1 decent carp and a few stockies early in my left edge while I was feeding my shallow line. And then basically I've gone in and I've caught in little spells on my shallow line through the day. Because it was quite still early on, I felt like the fish weren't settling early, and you go in, you get a good little run, and then it stopped. And then as the day picked up, just got a little bit of a breeze blowing down towards me. It wasn't much of a ripple, but you could just feel the bit of breeze blowing down towards me. You could feel the breeze, and it just got gradually better. My right edge that day as well, later on in the day when the breeze blew in, I actually got a bit of scum in my right edge, so I decided to start feeding maggots shallow on the reed bed in the right edge, because it is quite deep down that right, and that come brilliant for me. Last 2 hours I've caught sort of 50 F1s, and I probably had 35 down the edge and 15 more in the open water, and I finished with 81 F1s for £139, which won me lake. So another brilliant day's fishing. Like I say, we're just being lucky at the minute with everywhere we're going. It's just fishing really well, solid with fish, and yeah, come 4th in the match. Felt like I'd done the best I could. I was the best weights overall, a 1 to 4, so I was really happy with my match again. Brilliant day's fishing as you normally get at Partridge, plenty of bites. And on the day, young Harry Campbell managed to win the match. I think he's only 17, Harry Campbell now. He's a brilliant angler. Obviously, I know him quite well. He fishes at Partridge all the time, and I know how good he is. So, made up to see him get into the Fish O final. I do feel like he'd have a really good chance in that final, so he's definitely one to look out for. He had 188 pound off late 6. I think he caught shallow on casters. And there was loads of other good weights. Les Marshall had 180 pound. I think there was 147. I think there was about 20 ton plus weight. So Partridge had fished really well, fish to catch everywhere, and that's brought us up to sort of the last match of mid-April, which was at Westwood Lakes, and that was on Wednesday, the Wednesday after the Partridge Fish Show, Westwood Lakes. And again, we went down there, and there'd been a festival on over the weekend, and when I looked at the weights, I could just tell it wasn't fishing up to how it normally would fish. Now, I don't know whether that was to do with the pressure on the lakes. There was quite a few anglers on the festival, or the weather conditions had dropped a little bit cooler. Now I'm sat here today, again it feels quite windy, a little bit cooler. I don't know whether the fish had just had a bit of a knock on the head with the drop in temperature, especially with them lakes being quite shallow at Westwood. But looking at it, it seemed to me like sort of 70 pound was a good weight on a lot of the lakes, and you were going to need to draw on swallow in order to catch the weight that you needed to catch to win. So going in the bag, hoping to draw swallow, and I actually pulled out 20 on Falcon, which is the lake what the Fishermania final's on. Now, decent peg on the lake, it looked nice. I actually had a spare peg either side as well, which on a Fish O qualifier, when it's pegged quite tight, is brilliant. I looked at it and I thought, if this lake was fishing well, I'd probably quite fancy it here today. But I was hoping that maybe, you never know, they can just switch on. My plan was maggots down the middle. It was a really shallow peg that. It was only probably about 2 foot deep down the middle, so fishing on the bottom, I wasn't planning on fishing shallow. And then I fished micros in my edge early. I was going to swap that to ground bait, and then I also had me a cross line if I needed it and if I could fish it in the wind. And as it turned out, it fished really, really difficult. I didn't catch a lot, especially sort of later in the match. It seemed like it started off okay. I started in my edge, caught a few on pellets, dropped onto my middle line, had an early run, got to sort of 15 or 20 fish early. Sort of after half the match, I might have had 20 fish, and then by the end, I think I only had 27 or 28 fish. It just literally shut down. No one was getting bites. I just think the cold weather had really affected the lake with it being so shallow, and I ended up with 56 pound, which won my section, and only 57 pound won our lake on the day. Charlie Law around the other side, he'd won the lake with 57 pound, which, when you know how many fish are in that Falcon Lake at Westwood, is baffling, but it just shows you how the lakes can switch off when obviously the weather isn't great. So obviously wasn't great for me on the day, but still won my section. And on the overalls, a lad I know quite well, Gaz Ainscoe, he won the match off 6 on swallow with about 115 pounds. So massive well done to Gaz on making the final. And yeah, that's brought us up to today. So loads of fishing. I've been here, there and everywhere, all over the country, but I've had some brilliant fishing, and I'm looking forward to the next month, which obviously in May, we've got loads more coming up. I've got a Fishermania qualifier at the Oaks. I've got a festival at Puddle Dock Farm. I think I've got a qualifier at the Glebe, a qualifier at Westwood, a festival at Westwood, and a festival at Lindholme. So I'll probably catch up with you next month and talk about how that's went. Hopefully we'll have a great time, catch a load of fish, and the weather's going to pick up and be nice and sunny, and it's just going to be bagging up. So hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next month.